Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to show you how I use my embroidery machine to do a double fabric applique iron-on patch. Stay tuned. Okay, for this design I'm going to be doing a double applique in the letter K. And by double applique I mean that this will have two different fabrics stitched into the applique. And just to test stitch this, I'm going to do it as a patch to see how well it stitches because I've not used this design before. I'm going to save it to my flash drive and take it over to my VE2200, also known as the Brother Dream Maker. Okay, so I'm going to get ready to get this design stitched out. I have hooped my 6x10 hoop, and it has Vilene, which is a water-soluble stabilizer in it. Remember, I'm going to be doing this applique as a patch, so I'm going to use water soluble because of the method that I use to make my patches. Now I'm going to just stitch the background color in a craft felt, and I'm just going to fold it to make sure that the center is centered with the hoop. It's going to be a little bit more fabric than I need, but that's fine. It's only 20 something cents per piece, and this I got this at Walmart, the felt. So I'm going to pin it down, just making sure that all the parts that are going to be stitched are covered and smooth. And I will meet you at the embroidery machine. Okay, so I'm at my embroidery machine. I have the felt hooped on top of the Vilene on my 6x10 hoop. I'm gonna lock it in place so that it'll be ready to stitch. My design is loaded and it's gonna start. The first stitch will normally be the placement stitch. Because I don't really need the placement stitch, I'm gonna skip that step. But normally, you know what? I'll just do it as if we're doing the placement stitch, okay? Just because I don't want to confuse anybody. The placement stitch is normally done on your stabilizer before you actually put your fabric down so that you'll see how much fabric you need. For this, it doesn't matter because I already have my fabric covering the whole area, but I'm going to do this placement stitch real quick just so you'll see. The placement stitch essentially follows the same path as the tack down stitch, which stitches the actual fabric in place. Let's see, are you able to see that clearly? And if this design works out, the next time I use it, I will show you exactly how to do it on fabric with the placement stitch being used as its intended way, in its intended way. But I'm not sure how this will stitch out, so I'm just gonna record in hopes that it'll come out okay and go from there. So in the real world, this would be your placement stitch. I would then put my fabric on top of it, and then it's going to stitch the tack down stitch, which holds the fabric in place. And I'm going to let that stitch out, and I'll be back. So now it has completed stitching out the tack down stitch, which is in the same exact spot as the placement stitch. You see, you can't tell the difference, but it's been stitched twice. And so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to trim around all of this to get the actual shape cut out and get the excess off. Okay. Okay, so I've taken the needles out, and I'm going to use my regular scissors initially to start in on the bulk of this felt. And then I'm going to take my applique scissors to continue cutting as close to the border of this stitch as possible without actually cutting into the thread, because we want to keep it tacked down onto the Vilene, which is the stabilizer, but we don't want it to be cutting through the Vilene either. So just cutting as close as I can. to get rid of all of that. And these are just some applique scissors from Walmart. Fisker brand. I think Fisker does all of their scissors in orange. Correct me if I'm wrong, but everything that I have that's by Fisker is orange. And I don't remember ever having anything by Fisker that's not. So I'm just going to continue stitching all around here, and then I'll do the placement stitch in a minute. So I'll turn the camera off while I finish trimming this, and I'll be back. Okay, I am back to the machine. I have the K all cut out. Let me just show you real quick. It's all cut out, and I'm going to put it back in the machine, and we will get the next step stitched. But before I do that, I just realized I don't want to use gray. So I'm going to switch my thread out real quick. I always clip my thread and then pull it out from the bottom so that I'm not backing the thread out of the machine. You don't want to mess up your tension disc like that. At least that's what they told me. So I always pull it out that, you know, forward. And always thread with your pressure foot up for the same reason. Okay, so my third step is the placement stitch for the inner fabric of this design. And the inner fabric will be a print fabric. And I think that the gold will be the best color against it, so that's why I decided to switch out the thread. Okay, so this is stitched out. What I will do next, I'm going to put this fabric on top of the placement lines. And if you want, you know, certain parts of your fabric for your appliques to be definitely within the area that's going to be used, just make sure that you line it up. But for this, I really don't care. I just want it in there. So I'm going to pin this down so that it doesn't shift when it's stitching, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got it pinned down here, 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 and here, and I'm going to slide it back in here. We're going to run step number 4, and that is the tack down for the inside fabric. And after that stitches out, I will trim it the same way the initial stitch was trimmed to cut out the K, the inner part of the K. And this design does have over 15,000 stitches, so I definitely won't record the whole process. But this part isn't too bad, at least I don't think so. And then the great thing about videos, you can always kind of skip through them. Appliques are a great way to use up scrap fabrics as well if they're large enough as far as your scrap fabrics are concerned. Or you could do a smaller applique and do something with them as well. Okay, so I don't know if you can see or not, but you can see a little bit of the gold stitching where the other inner part of the K is. I'm going to take this to the table, cut it out, bring it back to the machine. Okay, so I have the inner fabric all trimmed up, and we are going to move on to step 5, which is going to give the outer stitch of the background fabric, I should say. So I'll put that back in the machine. Make sure I'm not losing too much thread or getting it caught up on anything. Sometimes that happens. Trim a little bit of it. Okay, so we're going to lower the pressure foot and press go. Initially, with your satin borders, depending on who digitizes it, you will get a smaller zigzag stitch that goes along first, and then it will be covered with the back and forth satin stitch. Some digitizers I found will do like a series of lines going up and down and around the design, and then the satin stitch will zigzag across. But this digitizer does the zigzags around it initially. And so it'll do that for a while until it's all done, and then it'll move on to the actual satin stitch. And can you see where I mean? Okay, that's a better close-up of it. Okay, and I'll be back. So at this point we are doing the satin stitch, and it is almost complete. You see where over here that is that initial zigzag that the digitizer creates to tack the edges down, and then the satin stitch literally traces over that point and a little bit wider. I think it goes a little bit wider than what's actually zigzagging to begin with. But anyways, that is what gives it the look that we're wanting, and it's just going back and forth. We're almost done with this point of the K, and I will come back after it stops and we're ready for the next step. Okay, so it is finished stitching that outer border, which is that gold, wheat gold thread. And you see how it has a nice satin stitch all the way around. So that's going to be a nice border. Get it a little bit closer so you can see. And so the next step, we're going to do the stitch around the inner letter border. And for this design, I'm going to keep it the same color. Some people may opt to change colors, and that's fine. Essentially, this design is going to do the same exact step that it did with the outside, as far as creating that tack down and then going around doing the satin stitch, and I'll come back when it gets closer to the end. Okay, so we are completely done with the last stitch, and we have our K applique, and it's got a nice satin border on the inside. So now I'm going to take this to the table. I'm going to get all of this here Vilene off of it. I'll actually trim most of it out before I use a Q-tip to dab it out. I'll just trim around it, and I'll cut the inside of this out, and then I'll dab around the edges to get rid of the excess. Okay, so I'll see you at the table. Alrighty, so this is the fun part because the product is almost complete. Just gonna go through and trim this, and it won't take too long. I'm not going to get really close, because honestly what I will do before this is all done, I'm going to trace the edges on the back side of that last border with a little bit of fray stop, and I don't think it's necessary because I'm going to still put a heat applied adhesive to the back, but it's a habit and that's what I'm going to do. I figure it can't hurt. So I'm just going to go through and trim all of this, and I'll see you in just a few moments. Okay, I almost forgot to show you what I meant by cleaning up the back. I'm literally going in, just creating a small hole so that I could trim all of this away, or as much as I possibly can, because this is just the water soluble stabilizer, and I truly do not need that on the back of the patch. And I want to be sure that we have as little interference with the heat applied adhesive that we're going to use as little interference as possible. So I'm just going to go through and trim this off. And in case you're wondering how I got my scissors in there, I literally just poked a little bit and made sure that I wasn't coming through the actual fabric and trimmed. You can use a seam ripper to create your little slot to get your scissors in there. And I guess this is why some people don't use Vilene, but I like the Vilene as my stabilizer because it gives me the edge on the patch that I like at the end. So I just wanted to show you real quick how I do trim that up to clean it up. And I'll take a few minutes to do this and I will be back. Okay, so I have all the Vilene cleaned up that I could possibly get off by cutting it without cutting it all up. So now I'm going to take my Dritz Fray Check and I'm just going to do a little bit on the outer borders of this applique slash patch. I'm going to lay it on top of a paper towel and I'm just going to basically draw a line along the outside. And this will just give me peace of mind knowing that that outer border is not going to unravel. It shouldn't. But somewhere along the line when I first started doing patches, this was a step that I was taught to do. And so I just kind of stick with what I know works. And I'm just tracing all around the edges. And I think I came over here already. A little extra won't hurt. So I've got that done. Now I am going to get some hot water here. I have a Q-tip and I'm going to clean up the outer edges of the patch as far as the Vilene is concerned. And that is just by dabbing it along the edges. I'm hoping that you can see this. And that gets it all cleaned up. And I'll go through the whole outline of this patch. Okay, so we have the Vilene all cleaned up off of the edges. It is a little bit damp, so I don't want to put the Heat and Bond Ultra Hold, which is what I'm using as the heat applied adhesive. I don't want to apply that on it while it's wet. So what I will do is I will turn my iron to the dry setting so that it's not steaming. I'm going to take my patch, I'm going to put it in between my two layers of paper towel, and I'm going to press it just a little bit to allow the heat to get some of that moisture out, and the moisture will kind of soak into the tile. I'm saying tile like we're talking about carpet, bath towels or tiles in the bathroom floors. That's not what I'm talking about. Paper towels is what I'm talking about. And there I go mumbling. I tend to do that. And I'm just pressing to get that extra moisture out. And if you find that ironing it doesn't get enough moisture out, just let it sit and dry, okay? And that is what I'm going to do because I don't want to press it too much, but the edges down here, I don't feel like they're dry enough yet for me to put the Heat and Bond Ultra Hold on. So I'll be right back. Alrighty, so I have the outer borders dry enough to apply the heat adhesive. The Heat and Bond Ultra Hold is what I'm using, and it comes in a tube like this, and this is the color of the packaging. It's the red packaging. That's the Ultra Hold. If you have that purple label versus the red, the purple is light, and you don't want to use that for any patches that you might be doing. So if you can't get a hold of some pressure heat applied adhesive from like All Stitch or Styles or somebody online, you can go to Walmart, grab you a tube of this, and you can still do some pretty good patches with this. Okay, so anyways, I have this cut out to the shape that I need, or the size that I need. Now I just want to make sure I have it going in the right direction. Now to start off, I will turn this over, and with the dry iron, I'm going to just apply it to the back and just give a little bit of a press. Okay. And that will get it on there good. I'm hoping you can see this. Just pressing it, pressing it, pressing it. And then the thing about this, you have to let it cool before you actually pull it up as far as taking the paper off. But according to the directions, you should be pressing this, I should say. Let's see here. It says, place material adhesive side down on top of the project. Press and hold iron for 8 seconds for each section. I know that wasn't 8 seconds for each section, but let's see what's going on here. Okay, it's hot. And I think what I will do, and you see I'm using my paper towel to keep my table clean, I'm going to press it just a little bit more, just to be sure that it is sticking. And this is probably about 6 seconds per section, just to ensure that it is getting enough heat so that it'll do it properly. Getting tongue twisted. It's getting late. Oh, that's hot. Jeez. Okay. So let this cool. And I always say let this cool because you could kind of see in the middle there. That's kind of liquefied. You don't want to peel it off right now because it's not set. And when you do peel it off, it's going to have a nice shine to it. And you'll be able to iron it onto whatever you're going to be ironing it onto. T-shirt, jacket, maybe a bag. And so I think this is cooled pretty well. Let's peel it and see. Yep, that looks good. So it'll be nice and shiny like this. And now, if you're doing some patches that you're sending to somebody, you can just leave it in here on the paper and trim around on the paper. That would be fine. But since I'm going to be using this patch, I'm going to take it off, obviously. And I'm going to trim this extra heat and bond off of there. I'm not going to get all of it off, but I will get most of it off. And these curved scissors might come in handy. Okay. So I'll just get this all cleaned up and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Alrighty, so I have the patch completed and the iron-on adhesive is on the back, and this is Heat and Bond Ultra Hold. Know what that is? Oh, that's an extra piece where I cut it off at. Okay, so the Heat and Bond Ultra Hold is on the back. You could tell it's nice and shiny, but that is where you'll apply it to whatever you're going to put it on. I always cover my patches, then I press each spot for about 10 seconds. Some people do 6, some people do 8. Just depends on what you're applying them to, okay? So if it's a light t-shirt, you could probably get away with 6 seconds. But something heavier, a sweatshirt, I would do 10 seconds at a minimum, okay? So there you have it. This is how this patch came out. In my next video with this same design, not the same print, but the same applique design, I will be putting it on a shirt, okay? Thanks for watching.